if you remember the first blast of COVID, it's like you couldn't buy toilet paper, you couldn't buy food, the supply chains were breaking down. It was a mess. And what Hilary King says there is that there were these contrasting headlines. On the one hand, you had a mess of the supply chains breaking down and not being able to get things. On the other hand, you had these headlines that the things like the farm to door CSAs take off. We talked about CSAs, community supported agriculture, the idea that you buy a share in a farm and then they deliver food, usually to a central place, weekly harvest from that food. And in some ways, yeah, this did fill in the gap, especially for those who are already doing this food work, the everyday activism in these networks. So King, like Willow before, is drawing on Mansbridge, talk about everyday activism. And what Hilary King is saying is that you get these practical actions. So people are taking the practical actions and you add that to continual subjective effort. And what that adds up to is iterative self-making. That sounds weird to me. Iterative. Iterative is like a repeating process or a cycle, but I feel like it's a little bit more than that in this chapter. Continually, constantly remaking ourselves. So yeah, it's a loop, right? She calls it a reinforcing loop, connecting the daily activities with self-reflection to support those actions. Oh yes, that's what iterative means, like this. I feel like it keeps going. It's like a cycle that goes along like this. So that's why I'm making this motion. You have this cycling, but it's not just going around in a circle again and again. You're going towards some other point. It's a complicated word. If you just want to say repeating or a cycle, they should, but iterative implies that journey where you're taking a journey, but you're also cycling or repeating. That's what I'm going to say. Iterative self-making. There's our author, Hilary King, Emory University. She gave a talk up at Yale, Atlanta's alternative food system. She's here talking in this chapter about three scales, or the chapters have optimism at scale, and there's three different scales of everyday activism, the ways in which people are embedded in these different kinds or scales of things. So we first have community level self-making. And in this, she says that when the pandemic hit, all these activists were stretched really thin. It was really hard on them. People are stretched thin and then they don't like each other. And then the next thing you know, things are rough. In this instance, she says that because of the crisis, they were able to expand on their collaboration, their knowledge, and sharing resources. And that would be great. They collaborated. So good for them. Do that, Simi. Collaborate with people. Trying. Yeah, no, just kidding. I know it's really hard. It often doesn't work. The second thing was the iterative self-making within organizations, adjusting missions and goals. And in this case, they were talking about how they were using these organizations to scale up organizational capacity to further racial justice. What was happening then? The George Floyd protests, and a lot of people started thinking and wondering about issues that hadn't perhaps thought about them in different spaces before. So they mentioned this book, The Color of Food, Stories of Race, Resilience, and Farming, which is still this is a pretty big reflection in that community-supported agriculture space, which in many ways has been traditionally, at least on some of the farms, a white hippie space, you might say, but in fact, it is people of color and immigrant populations, African Americans, who produce and transmit most of our food. They mention a group called the Global Growers Network, and there's a group in Atlanta, but there's others around that are integrating people who have come from perhaps refugees or immigrants from different societies and have farming techniques already to get them into the farms and marketplaces that we have. The third scale is an individual iterative self-making. Optimistics reorientations like growing plants, your own food and little plants during COVID. So instead of that, is at least this farmer that they're talking about said, hey, no, I'm supposed to support people. I don't know if he's breaking the capitalist cycle. He just becomes a consultant for those people who want to grow gourds and other things. And so he goes around and helps them. And so their idea is that every neighborhood will have their own neighborhood farmer. We hope one day that every neighborhood will have their own neighborhood farmer, that the food will be that local and that will just be just normal. Our author is very, very excited here about iterative self-making at multiple scales as an integral part of everyday activism. But that's when there's a crisis. What about the norm? It seems people only come together during like crisis times, and the rest of the time they're just off doing their own thing. So that's a good point. I was going to say that's what's maybe interesting about that transition movement chapter is they're trying to prepare for what they think is going to be a crisis, so they're ready when it happens, and then they're going to. So maybe that's an answer. But absolutely, I get very sad when I think about, yeah, there was a few minutes where people were pulling together and helping each other and being like, this is, yeah, we're gonna, but yeah, it doesn't seem very long. And I dread if some other thing starts coming through, it's gonna be even worse, right? People are gonna be like, the number of people that go on TV all the time are like, the COVID lockdowns, that's what ruined everything. That's why that bridge collapsed. It's no, seriously, it's unbelievable. So I don't know. That does not give me hope. And then, Liv, you said you remembered the George Floyd protests. And of course, we were all out there in Oneonta and on the streets and all over the place. People were shutting things down. How's that going? Where did it go?
Didn't fix racism.
Didn't fix racism. How about police shootings? Did we fix those? No. In fact, last year was the highest ever. It's like, what? And if anything, all you hear about crime is everywhere. We need more. We need to put the National Guard in the subway. We just did that. Yeah. What the heck? The thing is statistically though, crime did go up for a while, but then last year it went way down, but still people are like crime. I'm not saying crime isn't real, but it's like 10% as real as it was when I was growing up. And statistically, it's so much better now. But anyway. Remember when people got excited to band together because of the family separation and we were going to help people from other countries? Remember that?
When was that?
Yeah, when was that? We don't even remember it. We don't even remember it because every freaking day we hear about that part. It's out of control and the immigrants and we need. So I don't know. I have to fuse some emotions here to somehow get out of this trap because I feel this chapter, sometimes I'm like, did Hilary King write this during some crazy optimistic time that lasted for like 3 months and then just turned it in and published it? Because I don't know, if I had to rewrite it now, I'd be like, what happened? I don't know. Maybe things are better in Atlanta. At the end of the chapter, she gives us 3 ways in which anthropology maybe can help brings various tools to social change. I agree with these. Probing, framing, and furthering. Probing sounds bad, so let me say what that is. Asking deep questions and prompting reflection. So getting people to reflect on their activities by asking deep questions about them. Framing also could sound bad. Naming activities people intuitively undertake. So people are just doing their thing and the anthropologist is like, oh, this is everyday activism. I'm like, oh, cool. And then furthering, collaborative strategizing about the future.